Okay. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today, inshallah, we will read from the second chapter of the 29th flash. We are going to see where we are going to compare comparisons of belief and unbelief. And we will talk about how philosophy and unbelief and misguidance sees the world, and how we as believers, we should see the world, inshallah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. As I said, this is from the second chapter of the 29th flash. It's about the phrase Alhamdulillah, the phrase all praise be to Allah. Before we start, we will point out two things. The first is philosophy. Philosophy is a pair of dark glasses which shows everything to be ugly and frightful, while belief in God is a transparent, clear, luminous pair of spectacles which shows everything to be beautiful and familiar. Second, man is connected with all creatures, has a sort of commerce with all things, and by nature is compelled to meet, talk, and be neighborly with the things that blockade him. So too he possesses six aspects: a left, right, upper, lower, front, and back aspect. Before we start, because we will talk about these aspects, right, left, upper, lower, front, and back. But in every aspect, we will compare philosophy, how philosophy sees, and how belief shows things to us. And here we see that philosophy and belief, they are like a pair of glasses. And I will read again, inshallah. Philosophy is a pair of dark glasses which shows everything to be ugly and frightful, while belief in God is a transparent, clear, luminous pair of spectacles which shows everything to be beautiful and familiar. Inshallah, I want to ask our speakers, Colin Hocam and Baykar, inshallah, about the philosophy. How should we understand the philosophy here? Some people like philosophy, some people are opposed, but what do we mean by philosophy here? Baykar abi, are you any comments on this?
Usually Colin Hocam goes first, but
okay, Colin Hocam. Philosophy here, what do we mean by philosophy?
If he's not available, I can take a couple of words. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah rabbil alamin, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Honestly, I want to say that I'm not really trying to analyze if religion and science is in conflict or in confirmation, if science confirms Islam and Quran. But my understanding in this is philosophy is the totality of the result of the human observations, human experience, human analysis, and approach to this life in order to understand human being and the universe, the beings around us. So are we having just an approach with our mere senses, feelings, and mind, or are we accepting any guidance which is divine guidance in this sense? So it's kind of comparing our belief, our faith with philosophy in this sense. So what Ustad describes, to my understanding, is the philosophy does not accept any guidance. It's mere, human self just, claiming that he's enough to analyze, understand the results of his observations with his ability, and that result is not necessarily, bringing him to the truth, and it gives him a very wishy-washy understanding, a complicated understanding of the life and the universe. Inshallah, we'll talk about this, in the coming slides.
Yeah, it's good that I liked, when you mentioned the difference between philosophy and belief. The philosophy that you mentioned here is the philosophy that doesn't accept divine guidance, right? It accepts human intelligence as the basis, and it doesn't take divine guidance as his teacher. Yes, Colin Hocam, are you doing any comments?
Yeah, I mean, philosophy is a word that appears on numerous occasions in Risale-i Nur, but not always to denote the same thing. And actually, it's only rarely used in the sense to which most of us are accustomed. Philosophy is investigation of the nature, causes, and principles of reality, or knowledge or values based on logical reasoning rather than empirical methods. That's how we understand philosophy. And while Ustad does use the term in its classical sense, more often than not, he uses philosophy in a pejorative sense. In other words, with a certain amount of disdain. And he alludes to the materialistic interpretation of science, of course, which by the time of Ustad had given rise to various intellectual movements, social, political, and cultural movements, which were largely atheistic in nature. Ustad himself makes a distinction between the kind of philosophy that he deems acceptable and the kind that he finds dysfunctional to human happiness. And I've found a quote, because I don't think it's as simple really as saying, we have philosophy on one side and belief on the other side. I don't think it's as simple as that. And if you'll allow me to read the quote, Ustad says, "The philosophy that the Risale-i Nur strikes at fiercely and attacks is not absolute, but it's the harmful sort. For the philosophy and wisdom that serve the life of human society and morality and human attainments and industry and progress are reconciled with the Quran. Indeed, such philosophy serves the Quran's wisdom and doesn't oppose it. This sort, the Risale-i Nur doesn't bother with. As for the other sort, since it both leads to misguidance, atheism, heedlessness, and misguidance, and since with its spellbinding wonders, it opposes the Quran's miraculous truths, the Risale attacks and deals slaps at it with the powerful proofs in the comparisons contained in most of its part. It does not attack beneficial, rightly guided philosophy. Members of the secular schools can therefore embrace the Risale-i Nur without hesitation or objection." So what Ustad is saying here is that when he criticizes philosophy, he's not criticizing philosophy in an absolute sense. What he's doing is he is denigrating or criticizing those particular products of human intellection which are used not in the service of religion, but in the service of the human self, the I or the ana, the ego. Or, for example, people talk about serving humanity and human progress. So when the I, when the ana walks the line of philosophy, that is the I which has turned away from God. It's the I which refuses to admit its own existential impotence, its own creational poverty, and it stubbornly persists in this claim that it has to ownership over its own attributes. So what Said Nursi is saying in actual fact is the history of human society is actually the history of the tension which has always existed between two particular lines of approach and intellection, the line of prophethood and the line of philosophy. But he says the line of philosophy is not beyond redemption, because if the line of philosophy follows the line of prophethood, then it can bring great benefits for human society and for human life. What does it mean when we say the line of philosophy following the line of prophethood? Well, as I understand it, it means that we submit the intellect, our power of reason, the app, to the superior criterion of revelation. So history then becomes the story of the relationship between reason and revelation. Now, there's nothing wrong with reason as long as it's following revelation. In our time, of course, this tension has been reframed as the relationship between modernity and tradition, but that's another issue. So it's clear when Ustad Nursi talks about philosophy following prophethood, that what he means is that in order for us to prosper and attain true salvation, human reason must serve divine revelation and not the other way around. Human reason shouldn't look to claim primacy over revelation. Revelation must be served by reason. You know, it's through our power of reason that we accept revelation. But reason doesn't have primacy over revelation. And when reason serves revelation, you know, which it shouldn't, all kinds of the other way around. When revelation serves reason, then all kinds of problems arise. So we can't say that philosophy is opposed to belief as such. If it is working on its own steam, and if it's not guided by revelation, then it is dysfunctional. But there is a possibility that philosophy can serve revelation, in which case it's acceptable.
Jazakallah, it's good to make this distinction. And I remember one place, you know, since if philosophy is the investigation of truth, right? Even Said Nursi himself can be counted as a philosopher, you know, investigating the truth, you know, with his reason, serving the revelation. And also, I want to mention, you know, this philosophy that takes logic as basis is, you know, looking the universe on account of itself, right? Not on account of its creator. You know, just sees the world events without owner, without creator.
That's true, but that's not really philosophy as such. It's philosophy that is not tempered by revelation. You see, we have Muslim philosophers, you know, believing philosophers, and they submit their philosophical discourse to revelation, and they say that if you know, our understanding of the creation and our search for truth by using logic, by using philosophical principles, if that is controlled by revelation, if that is submitted to revelation, then why not? It's just another tool of understanding.
Right. So even as I said, Said Nursi can be counted as a philosopher in that sense, right?
I would probably not go as far as to say he was a philosopher, but he understands philosophy and he uses philosophical principles on occasion. Yes.
I guess in that sense, every one of us should be counted as a philosopher, because we have to use our reasoning, right? That's certainly.
Yeah, I think colloquially we can say that, you know, they talk about the philosophy of life. It means using your reason to understand reality, but that has to have a criterion. Otherwise, then it becomes derailed and it becomes problematic, because what's your criterion? You know, is your criterion just your reason? But our reason is limited. Our reason is lame without revelation, you know? So this has to be really sort of teased out and understood with nuance. And this is what Said Nursi does. I've heard people say, well, no, philosophy is bad, full stop. It's not that simple.
Yes, mashallah, jazakallah. So inshallah, in light of what we talked, we can talk about the aspects. But before going, is there any comments on the second part? You know, man is connected with all creatures, and we will talk about those aspects. Any comments before we go to the next slide?
I think it's straightforward, isn't it? It's talking about the relationship that we have with everything. He uses this 6 aspects a lot, doesn't he? Can you think of other places where he uses, you know, the 6 aspects of, you know, past, future, and various other things?
In 26th flash. So we talked about philosophy and belief, and we also talked about, we said man is connected with all creatures. So we are starting the first aspect. On wearing either of these 2 pairs of spectacles, glasses, man can see the creatures and things present in the aspects mentioned above. We can see the creatures in the aspects mentioned above. Right aspect. What is meant by this aspect is the past. When it is looked at through the spectacles of philosophy, through the glasses of philosophy, what is seen is a vast, dark, terrifying, overturned graveyard where the doomsday of the land of the past has come to pass. There can be no doubt that this sight casts man into great terror, fear, and despair. Through the glasses of philosophy. And I will read this aspect from the glasses of belief. However, when this aspect is looked at through the spectacles of belief, even if the land appears to have been turned upside down, as indeed it has, there has been no loss of life. It is understood that its crew and inhabitants have been transferred to a better world, one full of light. The graves and pits are seen to be underground tunnels dug to another world, dug to lead to another light-filled world. That is to say, the joy, relief, confidence, and peace of mind belief gives to man is a divine bounty which makes him repeat thousands of times over, all praise be to God. Alhamdulillah. Yes, this peace of mind belief gives to man is a divine bounty which makes him repeat thousands of times over, Alhamdulillah. Yes, first aspect is the past. We are talking about philosophy, but what I see, you know, many people, especially this year, not only because of coronavirus, but many people that I know, you know, around my relatives and people I know, many people passed away. And what I experienced, you know, when you go to funeral, when you call them, even if they are believers, subconsciously, like we think that grave, you know, the past, the people who passed away, as if they went to a, you know, vast, dark, terrifying graveyard, and, you know, this icy terror, fear, and despair, you know, from just like it says here, you know, with the glasses of philosophy. Any comments on this?
Maybe, you know, I can start talking about a little bit about the previous slide. So Ustad, you know, puts this aspects in a certain way with his, you know, language, with his definition. But, you know, each one of us come with a different maybe definition of these aspects. But this is, you know, solid for everybody. This is not something strange to us. This is our life. And, you know, maybe I shared this many times, but again, I realize it more and more every day. We might be, you know, have been grown up in a Muslim family, in a majority Muslim society, you know, define ourselves as Muslims, but in my name, I will say that I'm more of a student of philosophy, and this is very heavy. This has a very heavy effect on our lives. So we, you know, as a human being, start observing the life. You know, as a child, we start asking, what is this, what is that, why? And then eventually, unfortunately, we lose some of them, take the answers as guaranteed, but still these aspects have a continuous relation with us. As Ustad put it here, man is connected with all creatures, has a sort of commerce with all things, and by nature is compelled to meet, talk, and be neighborly with the things that blockade him. So too he possesses his six aspects. So when Ustad, starts talking about these aspects, definitely philosophy is aware of these aspects. Most of the time we realize that they don't want to talk about this. They just want to, when, for example, they talk about the past, they just make it as like a story, a historical story, but do not really want to relate it to our own lives. It's not, the past is not just some strange land and some empires, but it was my ancestors, is my past, it's the humanity, it is directly related to me. So my whole world to the right, which is now in the history, is gone. Nothing here, all those huge arts and fruits of the civilizations and all those, I don't know, structures and buildings and empires that the humanity built it up, and all those things that we are proud of, now they're all past, they're gone. None of them are with us anymore. Is there any traces of them? Yes, but does this give us hope? Not really. With the view of the philosophy, they are also doomed to disappearance and non-existence. This only gives us a pain, and we cannot deny this, no matter how much they try to motivate us or live the instant. Yes, I have to live the instant and appreciate it, what Allah gave me at the moment. But if I just look at it to benefit selfishly, I cannot cut my links with the past. I need to come to a resolution, because it affects me directly. I'm a human being, I cannot live like an animal. I'm always related to these things. And my past is my past, it's not anybody else. It's not just a story in the book. It's the history of humanity is my history. Everything as a humanity we put on the table is now gone, disappeared. It's in the graveyard. So these aspects are our lives. No matter how you define it, you might come with different aspects and different definitions, but now Ustad is just analyzing our own experience of human experience.
Yes, Jazakallah. Barakallah. We should not, as you said, we should not forget that these aspects, we are connected to all of them. And now we are talking about the past. As you said, we are connected to the past, and we are not like animals. And through the philosophy, through the glasses of philosophy, what we see is a vast, dark, terrifying graveyard. So from this sense, as you said, animals are better, right? Because they do not see the past and they are not affected. They don't get harm in that sense. And interestingly, as human beings, Allah Ta'ala gave us this opportunity to, rise to the highest of the high, get benefits, seeing, it beautiful, seeing the future beautiful, meaningful, friendly. We can see the future like this, or we can see it as our enemy with no meaning and ugly. It's all up to us. Colin Hocam, any comments on this?
I think that
right.
Baikar, can you hear me?
Yes.
I think that Baikar explained it extremely well, and it was extremely evocative, you know, the way that he was describing it. This notion of reading the creation, you know, we all read the creation, every one of us, and consequently we take what I usually call an interpretive position, which is basically all it means is we have a criterion according to which we read. And if we think back to discussions that we've had before on the issue of hermeneutics and reading the book of creation, we've concluded that either you read it through the lens of belief or through the lens of unbelief. And so here I would see the word philosophy again, we have to be careful. Philosophy in this particular aspect means unguided reason, reason with the wrong criterion. And how we read the world, whether we read it in the name of God or in the name of the world itself or in the name of the ego, that determines how we see the world. And we need a valid and correct conceptual key, you know, with which we can open the closed doors of creation. It needs to be a key that works, you know, rather than one which breaks as soon as you put it in the lock. And that conceptual key, and it comes with the whole conceptual language, is the key of belief, the language of belief. So everyone, all of these 6 aspects that he's mentioning, the lens through which he's looking and which he calls philosophy, this means unguided reason. It means reason which is being understood according to a criterion which is not godly. So we read things impressionistically. So when we look at the past, as Ustad says, people see it just as this vast graveyard. All of my friends have gone. All of my family have gone. And since, you know, there's no empirical proof of an afterlife, we have to go on belief only. And I don't find enough evidence. You know, I'm talking now as someone who's looking through the eyes of philosophy. We don't find enough evidence for the hereafter. No one's ever come back from that world to report on it. So the only conclusion I can draw as a materialist is that the past is just a vast cemetery, a vast graveyard. And, you know, there's at the end of this life of mine, the same fate is waiting for me. There's a hole in the ground, 1 meter by 2 meters, and that is the doorway to eternal annihilation. Now, that is reading that particular sign through the lens of despair. And that lens of despair is there because I'm reading the book not in the name of Allah. And there are only 2 ways you can read the book, either in the name of Allah or not. And there may be lots of other things that you can describe as, you know, the counterpoints to Allah, but actually it's belief in Allah or not belief in Allah. There is no third way. And this applies to everything. And I think this is what Ustad is doing in this treatise. He's going through all of our connections, you know, all of our temporal connections to the past, to the future. And he's looking at each aspect from these 2 perspectives, you know, the lens of prophethood or the lens of revelation supported by reason, or reason unsupported by revelation, which is where the problem arises.
MashaAllah. Thank you, Colin Hocam. It was nice to see it from the eyes of someone who doesn't have belief, right? Who doesn't look in the name of Allah. Comparison. And it's very interesting, you know, 2 people are looking at the same thing, but one sees it beautiful, the other ugly, right? The one sees it's, you know, full of meaning, and the other with no meaning, and the one sees it as friendly, and the other sees it's, you know, terrifying, dark, even though they look at the same thing.
It's amazing, isn't it? They're not looking at different things. They're looking at the same thing but differently. It always amazes me how two people can come to diametrically opposed conclusions about looking at the same thing.
And maybe it's not necessarily two people. It might be two different views of one person.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, good point. Yeah,
Yeah.
because we change, you know, or maybe about some things you have the spectacles of belief on, but with other things you may have a weak point there, and you may be looking it through the spectacle of unbelief.
Yeah, definitely.
Very good point, Baikar. Excellent point. Easy to forget, you know, because we always want to talk about, you know, other people, but it could be us, you know, as believers having these two diametrically opposed viewpoints in the same day, or even at the same hour, or even at the same time.
Well, and to confess, you know, most of the time I can see that the first point of view is more dominant in my view, you know, in my approach to life. You know, maybe unfortunately, but I can see that most of the time, you know, the practical approach we just put out there is the first aspect most of the time, the philosophical approach.
Is this confession time? I understand what you mean. No, I mean, we shouldn't be personal. We shouldn't get personal, but it is for each of us as believers. There are things on which we are not so sure. You know, things where we believe, but maybe our conviction isn't as high as it should be, isn't as, you know, robust as it should be. And sometimes even without knowing, we take a philosophical position which is not guided by revelation. We use our own criterion as well. And that's usually where we go wrong, I think, is where we use our own criterion and we forget, you know, that there is a criterion which is transcendent and which is always correct. It's easy to forget, as you say, you know, in practical issues, it's very easy to overlook.
May Allah help us. Also, I want to point out some parts from the aspect of belief, how we see, inshallah, how we should see the grave. And it's a great condolence for, you know, people who lost relatives and, you know, family, friends. And it's understood that its crew and inhabitants, the people of belief who passed away, have been transferred to a better world, one full of light. You know, what we see at the grave, you know, it's dark, cold, you know, it's under like in the grave, dark, cold place, but it's in Japanese it says one full of light. The graves and pits are seen to be underground tunnels dug to lead to another light-filled world. And this is the joy, relief, confidence, and peace of mind belief gives to man. I don't know if it's the same with you, you know, people, you know, when we bury them, you know, to the earth, some people are saying, you know, how are they going to survive there, like, you know, in the grave, it's so cold and dark. But it's, you know, Said Nursi says it's like underground tunnels, we don't see it, but they go to a better world than this one full of light.
This man never fails to amaze me and move me. How he comes to these conclusions and articulates them so beautifully. You know, this is not just speculative theology, this is pastoral theology, you know. He's counseling us here. He's telling us, you know, as they say, there's an English expression, you know, you can't judge a book by its cover. A book is either better than its cover or worse sometimes. So you can't tell what something is just by looking at it. So when we look at things, we're often completely misled by appearances, and things which we think are terrible often turn out to be wonderful, and the reverse is also true. But the spirit in which he writes this is amazing, amazing.
Yeah, his analogies. I also like his analogy in the 26th flesh when he describes death. He says, death's veil is black, dark, and ugly. Dark and ugly. And he uses the word peche, like in original, like in Turkish, and it's translated as veil. And peche is the women wear to cover their face. And in Islam, these beautiful things are covered. Like these women are, they are the manifestations of Allah's name. Jamil.
Yeah,
They are beautiful and they are covered, right?
Yes,
Peche.
yes. Yeah.
So Ustad uses the word peche, like this veil, for the death as well. When you see a woman, this dark black veil on her face, right? You like some people are afraid, right?
Yes, yes.
But actually, in it's beautiful. Death is covered with this, dark veil. People are afraid, but it's beautiful actually inside. That's why it's covered. The men are not covered.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Quran is exactly the same. Death is portrayed, and the afterlife is portrayed as something terrifying. With the tortures of the afterlife, and the things which happen with the justice of retribution, which happens after we die, and death is seen as something to be feared in one sense, but that is because actually it is beautiful. It's a transition from one place to a better place, and if we knew how beautiful it was, and if suicide wasn't haram, everyone would be taking that route. Because if you understand how wonderful the next world is and how beautiful death is, actually, everyone would choose death volitionally. But suicide is prohibited partly for that reason, and death is made to appear terrifying because misguidance is terrifying. And what happens if we are misguided and we misguide ourselves and we are zalim to ourselves is more terrifying than any description of hell could ever make us feel.
Colin Hocam said in the beginning, he stated that there's only two ways to look into things, either with belief or unbelief, without belief. So if we think on this part regarding that statement, this is the only solution that's apparent out there. So most of the time, for example, you will see while people are condolences others saying that, oh, you cannot die with the death, the life continues, you need to just continue your thing. Yes, but again, we're human beings, we are related to all these things, and it also reminds me of my mortality, right? So this is maybe the fact in the life. If we ask anybody, what are you going to face in 20 years and 50 years? Yes, we have hopes, we have dreams, we have projects, but what is for sure, it is this. This is the fact. And if you just tell them, don't think about it. Don't really, give any credit to that. You don't spoil your instant pleasure. This doesn't help us. It is not humane. It's something else. As a human being, you cannot just shut down one part of your mind. That's the most obvious fact in my life. And is there any solution? Only solution is in faith.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Other
Wonderful.
ways, yeah. So the other philosophies, approaches, opinions, that doesn't give any real ointment, any real medicine to this.
You know, they
Just,
say,
yeah,
sorry, no, carry on.
just painkillers, right? It's the only thing they offer us is painkiller, and they sometimes come with some medicine saying that, oh, they find something to extend the life to 150 years, 200 years, or they will freeze our body, this and that. This is not new. Don't fake us, don't deceive us. This has been there since the pyramids and ancient history, and humanity, from the beginning of humanity, this was always there. Even this is in the Bible, in the history of Adam alayhi salam, right? In the Jannah, he was deceived by Shaitan with this same thing. So this is the dream of humanity, the living forever, and we just come with some painkillers, and the only solution is there in the faith, that there's no alternate approach to this. This is one side of it. And Cornejan, please go ahead.
No, I'm just listening to you. I'm entranced by the whole, your whole discourse on this. It's wonderful, because death is never spoken about. And the painkiller thing, the painkillers that they give us actually cause more problem than they purport to be able to solve. They make things much, much worse. And, extending life is just extending the problem. It's just postponing it, So we have to meet this head on. And, they say that there are only two things with any certainty in life. One is death, the other is taxation. You're always going to be taxed, and, you are going to die. Everyone is going to die. And that is certain, there's never ever, except maybe with one or two exceptions, of people that haven't died. And we know this. But for 99.99999% of all people, there is death. And we postpone thinking about it. We have turned it into a taboo. People are stigmatized if they talk about death. People say, oh, you're morbid, you're macabre. As you said, you're spoiling things. Why are you talking about these negative things? Why is it negative? Said Nursi is saying that, the graves and the pits, which you see as dark and dank and terrifying places, are actually underground tunnels full of light. What's the problem? Why are we scared?
if I don't face this now, it's also spoiling my instant pleasure. I don't need to wait for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, whatever, my expectation of life. It is spoiling my pleasure now at the moment.
Mm.
I cannot escape that as a human being, right? It's the fact. And moreover, Ustad is not, playing here the optimistic. He is talking about facts. He is really coming with evidences. That's why, for example, the Risale on the Resurrection, Khash, is one of the first ones. So the reality of the afterlife is as real as this life, even more. He comes with a lot of evidences with this. So he's not just, offering us, play the optimistic, this is a better option, so take this one. No, it's not it. He's really giving us an alternative approach, which will be really helping us, not just a real ointment for our sickness and wounds. That's not just a painkiller.
Absolutely. And it's the same when he talks about resurrection, because it's not just death that we have to discuss, it's also resurrection. And in the treatise on resurrection, the 10th word, he brings lots of analogies and parables and metaphors and comparisons to show that in this world there are so many examples of resurrection, mini resurrections. The universe is littered with them, from every spring, thousands and thousands and thousands of species are resurrected. But the human being, the human individual, every single night, we enter what is basically a kind of mini death. Sleep is the brother or sister of death. as it's usually portrayed. We turn off the light, we go under a sheet, our body sort of becomes semi-conscious. Our soul actually leaves the body during sleep. The temperature of the body goes down. So it's as though we are enacting our death. It's a kind of symbolic death. And then in the morning, we are resurrected. We wake up again, our body comes back to life. And it's a new day. So these examples of resurrection and these examples of death, through sleep, is the very best metaphor for death. Now, are we scared when we go to bed at night that we're not going to wake up in the morning? No, I think most people are not scared. Maybe there are some people with a phobia, oh, I'll never wake up. But, this is an exceptional thing. So if we're not scared that we may not wake up in the morning, why are we worried that we may not wake up after we've died? And Ustad also uses this as consolation, in the 10th word and elsewhere in the Risale. So it's both speculative theology and it's also pastoral theology, because he's counseling us with this and he's giving us hope and he's giving us consolation, as you said.
A statement related to this really shocked me when I first took the philosophy of religion class. These were not mere philosophers, but these are theologians, supposedly the people who tells us the creator, God. And one statement related to this topic, this theologian is making the statement that, God cannot compensate anything, any evil, any suffering we experience in this world in the next life. So this really hit me in the when I first heard it, but then I start thinking over that.
What does he mean? He can't compensate us.
So whatever the reward or the compensation I receive in the second life does not really an answer to the sufferings in this life. This was his approach. I'm trying to understand. So what is the basis of this statement? So I asked myself, I even asked my nafs, why not? This is anyways a temporary life. Anyways, I'm living, I'm going away. So, I'm just at the airport, at the waiting room. I'm living, the sofa, the seat was not that comfortable. Does it that much matter to me? I don't think so. But I realized that our belief in the afterlife is not there. We are not that sure, we lost that point. We lost that connection, as you said, we are not analyzing it anymore. We just, with all our senses, all our thoughts, all our effort, we are in this life. We don't want to think about the next one anymore.
This is ironic, though, isn't it, really? Because our cultures and our whole history is actually driven by death anxiety. It's this desire to escape death, and it's this disbelief in a physical hereafter that pushes us to try to create heaven on earth. To compensate for the heaven that we don't believe is going to happen after our death, we try to compensate and we try to build a heaven on earth, and heaven on earth always ends up by being hell on earth. So our whole lives are dictated by our death anxiety and this ability or this desire to escape, death. Death is the last taboo. It's never spoken about. And yet it's such an intimate part of our life. So why don't we discuss it? And I think the answer is clear. People don't want to think of the responsibility of belief, because belief is not just belief. Belief comes with responsibility. And I'm sure there are other reasons as well, but I just find it ironic that, death, which is so central to our lives, is something which we never, ever talk about. And as you said, we are so full of these painkillers that we're being given, you know, for this existential angst and this existential anxiety that we suffer, that we are basically semi-conscious most of the time. And that's why we can't discuss anything really, not just death. We don't discuss anything that's key to our salvation or key to our, you know, our existence.
Mm. I also remember, you know, when we talked about, you know, fear of death, we do not see that much like in the companions, right? And at the time of our Prophet ﷺ, you know, in the battles, in their lives, you know, they were not afraid of death, you know, like us. And I remember a hadith from Abu Dawud, our Prophet ﷺ says, at the end of time, I guess the word vehan will be thrown into your hearts, and that's fear of death. You know, you will start to fear death, and that because of love of world, as you said, you know, to compensate for the hereafter, they are together. I guess when you love this world, and you fear death, right? They're connected.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there are questions in the chat, if I'm not mistaken.
I see. Yeah,
I can't see them. There may be quite a few actually.
Harun hocam asked a question. It says a difference in the look ontologically takes us to being trapped in some of the names of the creator. In other words, local interpretation is subject to extreme views more compared to global interpretation.
I think that last week, this was something he said right at the end of the session, maybe 2 weeks ago. And then I think we said to him, or maybe I'm confusing sessions, I don't know. We said that, you know, next week, maybe you start with explaining what you mean, because that's quite, it's profound, I think. So maybe Harun should unmute and tell us.
Assalamu alaikum. Actually, I don't want to harm the flow. You know, it was at the time when you were comparing two different views. Like the belief view, it's kind of a clear view, whereas the philosophy view is colored lens view. I was thinking about this in terms of Esmail Husna, the concept, like everybody is searching for the meaning, but in this search, what I understand, we are trapped by some beautiful names of Allah. You know, there's a lot of discussion about this in Risale-i Nur, such as I look at the nature, I see the name Creator or Qadir, but I don't see the name Alim. Then I can attribute a lot of stuff to nature itself, including knowledge, laws, whatsoever. But if I look from a higher perspective, I can say that, oh, it's not just the power, it's not just the power of the creator, but also the knowledge of the creator should be working. And I should not start there too, you know, I should say that, oh, there should be compassion in it, and so on. What I'm saying, maybe all these extreme views, such as unbelief itself, if it contains view at all, can be attributed to local perspective and being trapped in one of the truths, one of the facts, because nobody can screw up as a whole, right? There should be some righteousness in what somebody is thinking or doing.
Yeah.
So in order for me to give credit, some portion, I'm trying to explain it with, you know, local understanding of the creator, although he doesn't attribute this to creator at all.
That's I'm intrigued by the notion of being trapped in a divine name. That's a really, it sounds bizarre, but I think you've really hit on something there. Yeah, and also when you say that no one is 100% an unbeliever, there is always, even if they don't actually admit, there is some way in which they have the truth in their hands. some aspect of the truth. You know, they recognize the names of God, even if they can't articulate them as divine names. So this is something I think we need to discuss at greater length, I think. Maybe in a dedicated session, talking about how we can be trapped in the divine names. You know why? Because I see it theologically as well. I think that some theologians were trapped in the divine in divine qudra. And I'm thinking in particular of the divine command theory, where they say that God can do anything. God can do anything. Even he can say that lying is good, and we would have to believe it, and we would have to act in accordance. And God himself can lie, because God can do anything. I see these people, mostly Ash'ariyun, trapped in divine qudra, you know, without looking at divine hikmah, maybe. So I think you've hit on something which is really theologically important. But also it has a very practical application as well, because this is how we mislead ourselves, or how we misled, you know, with a skewed understanding of divine names.
Yeah.
Another example, maybe, you know, related to afterlife, you know, every single religion in this or that way has an understanding of afterlife, but when you don't have, you know, a balanced understanding of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's names, you can just, you know, accept the heaven, but deny the hell. So God is love. He will not just, you know, punish any of his servants. You know, there could be many different approaches related to this. Thank you. Yeah.
Inshallah. Also, there is one comment about the fear of death before we end our session, inshallah. Muhammad Ali, he says our view of death is a bit different, and afterlife is actually a bit different with Christianity. No one may have any guarantee to be placed in a better place in the hereafter, right? This is very interesting. Islam never guarantees you Jannah as opposed to other religions. Everything depends on our moral deeds, Allah's mercy, and our repentance. As many hadith sahih define virtually how terrifying sometimes life after death will be. This sometimes drives us to anxiety, as we do not know what happened to our brothers and sisters in the graveyard. May Allah show us mercy. May Allah show us mercy both in this world and the next life.
This is also a huge topic, I guess, but just to say one word, you know, I guess comparing to the anxiety that somebody, you know, who lacks faith, who has unbelief and believes in the non-existence of everything at the end, would be much bigger than that anxiety. Because, you know, we have understanding of the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the other names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like Ustad compares the child, you know, running away, I mean, running to the mother while afraid, being afraid of, you know, her gentle smack, but running to the mother. So yes, we are afraid, and we should be afraid of the responsibility, but again, you know, there are other names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that's comforting us.
Baikar, can you make dua, inshallah, before we end the session? And then we can end the session with your dua, inshallah.
اللهم لا تخرجنا من الدنيا إلا مع الشهادة والإيمان. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد تب القلوب ودوائها وآفية الأبدان وشفائها ونور الأبصار وضيائها وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم آمين والحمد لله رب العالمين. الفاتح.